thank you for joining us today. And I'm going to need you to imagine that there's a pot of apple cider and cinnamon kind of gently wafting through the air as we kind of talk about Kolaj Institute and what this organization is about and how we got here. If you can, please put your questions in chat or in the Q&A, and we'll respond to them either through the session today or at the end of the session. And also, you can find more information about everything we're talking about on the Institute's website, which is collageinstitute.org. And someone's going to put that link in the chat right now. But I thought we'd start by talking a little bit about how Kolaj Institute came to be. Humans have been making collage for time immemorial, but we only have an hour. So I'm going to start with 2011, which is when Christopher Byrne and I, working with Benoit Desporteau, an artist at our gallery in Montreal, created Collage magazine. The idea was rather naive. It was one where we thought there's this interesting stuff going on in this collage community, and Ben's like, we should do a book about collage, and I'm like, no, we should do a magazine. And we kind of threw out this pre-issue because there was a zine fest and nobody knew what a pre-issue was, but it kind of was like the basics of what we were thinking the magazine would look like or be. And people responded extremely well to it. And a couple months later, we had the first issue of the magazine out there and published. And then it's been an incredible ride. We came very quickly to learn two things. One is that collage artists are incredibly enthusiastic. When we started the magazine, we thought we'd have like maybe 50 or 100 people would be interested in this quirky little thing that we were doing. And no, like we put out a call to artists and we had like 500 people who were like, yes, we make collage. And it was just intense from the beginning, but also really wonderful because what we were realizing was that collage was more than just a medium, it was a community. That there was a community here, there. And it was a wonderful opportunity to be able to kind of start reporting on this community as we were producing aspects of the magazine. And then as we kind of went further with it, we started to kind of see this community as a movement, as an art movement. I'm going to circle back to that in a minute. But there was a point in 2017 or so, 2018, that Chris Byrne and I realized that two things. One is that we have built accidentally a kind of massive archive of 21st century collage artists just by kind of the course of doing the magazine and people sending us books or postcards or catalogs or sending images and submitting to the artist directory. We have this incredible snapshot of these collage artists in a way that didn't exist elsewhere on the planet. Although that's not completely true, because I think Cecil Touchon has a really good snapshot and picture and archive as well out in New Mexico. And there are some folks in Europe that have been gathering this information as well. We are not alone on the planet, which is a wonderful feeling. But more importantly, we realized, and this is a little morbid, that if Chris and I got hit by a bus, all of it would go away because our family will not know what to do with it and they will put it into a dumpster. And then all of this information, this archive, this material, this legacy of this community would be lost. And so I started thinking about, okay, how can we kind of hold on to this and send it into the future? And this really guides a lot of my approach with Kolaj Institute. As excited and engaged I am in the present day, my secret hope is that some nerdy graduate student is going to discover what we did in 100 years and go, weren't they cool? Right? Kind of like the way we discover like what the artist did 100 years ago and said, oh, weren't they cool? And that's really a lot of what this work is about and what Kolaj Institute is about. It's about documenting this medium and kind of working with this community so that it does exist in the future as much as it exists now. And so let's talk a little bit about how we did that, how that came about. You know, in 2018, it was Collage Fest, and this was the Great Collage Swap. And after this moment, and we all sat around this room in the Aloft Hotel, and we said, well, what should this thing be? What should this Kolaj Institute be? And we talked about two models, and I forget who mentioned it, but it was a really brilliant observation that you can kind of create a silo, meaning you can create a single organization that kind of holds and gathers and brings everything together, and that organization lives somewhere, and it's kind of like the museum of collage, you know, the museum of 21st century collage, and then you have to go there to do it. And that's one model. And then the other model was the infection model, was the one where we spread out and infect the rest of the art world with this vision of art, this vision of collage. And I'm going to pause here and talk about that because I think that's incredibly important. And we talked about this at that meeting as well. Collage is unique in the art world, right? People come to Collage Fest who are used to dealing with the art world, and they pull me aside and they say, everyone's so nice. This is such a laid back conference. I don't think we realize how unique collage artists are and our willingness to kind of drop some of the art world bullshit and just kind of love the art we're making, love the art other people are making, and be in community with one another. We are friendly, we are open, and it's kind of amazing in the 21st century, you can go to almost any major city in the planet, find the collage group, and crash their regular collage meetup and have an instant cohort of artists that you can network and connect with. That is an amazing opportunity for our world, and particularly at a time where capitalism keeps us kind of split and divided from one another, and that a lot of times power keeps us from coming together, because when we come together, we're stronger. So that's one piece that I think collage is really important and part of that message. But the other piece is just how we survive modernity. That there's a reason collage became increasingly popular at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. And it has, I think, to do with its ability to make sense of the world we live in. Before that time, human beings rarely left their farm. They didn't spend much of their life more than 20 miles or 20 kilometers from where they were born. And all of a sudden, humans are global. Humans are transgeographic. They're having communities that are connecting to identity as well as geography. And that's confusing as hell. And part of what collage does is collage helps us make sense of a diverse and complex world. And I think that's why we see collage as footprint so dominant in both 20th century and also moving forward into 21st century art. And that's a very powerful thing. And you add to that element of community, because the thing is, when you leave the farm that your ancestors have lived on and worked for centuries, right, you are now at an urban center and you are now isolated, you are alone. That there's a loneliness to modernity that a number of artists, a number of philosophers and writers have pointed out and spoken to, right? And I think that it's not surprising that with collage comes that element of community, because it's how people come together. And all of that means that I think we have an extremely powerful message, a powerful story to tell the rest of the world. So we're talking about this deep, having deep thoughts at Collage Fest. And we're like, all right, maybe we should do something about that. Maybe we should form an organization. This is the second year, 2019, and we're all trying to survive a hurricane at Art Club. This is the survivors photo of who was left as we were flooded out. And there's Lance laughing there because he remembers that incredibly stressful moment. But it did kind of was amazing that when in the face of this climate crisis, in the face of this weather emergency, that the artists came together and just said, we're still going to do what we do, right? It's an incredibly, for me, beautiful moment of resilience. From there, this is 2019, we teamed up with Volume Montreal and did a symposium on the book as a place for collage. And this was the second time we'd really tried to bring this community together. And we created this symposium that explored books as a means of distribution for collage, something I firmly believe in, because I think books can do things that exhibitions can't. Books can exist for longer periods of time. They can travel, rather making other people travel. And also they are a powerful document of what took place and what happened. And so we had this symposium in early 2019, and then we went off to Scotland and did a residency. We created the Schwitter's Army. And so the Schwitter's Army is essentially a collection of art that lives at Mers Gallery in Sanquhar, Scotland. It lives in the basement under an old lemonade factory in a filing cabinet. And the thing about Schwitter's Army is, and I've talked about this, but I don't know if it's explicit, I had a secret agenda, which was to demonstrate how this community is actually a movement. And it's a 21st century art movement. And there's a book coming out that I keep promising is almost done. But part of what I'm trying to do with this project, and this gets at the heart of Kolaj Institute's mission, is really this idea that collage, this thing that we're involved in, is a 21st century art movement, and an art movement that also reshapes and redefines what an art movement is. That a lot of the history of art movements is 6 white guys in Paris who knew each other, who decided to paint weird. And then that all of a sudden becomes a movement, right? And it becomes a thing, right? Well, this is collage. What's going on in collage is actually a movement of people. That the work of Misprinted and Red Farwell doing Febrelage every year, and motivating thousands of collage artists with prompts on Instagram to kind of make work and share ideas. That's a movement. Every project that you see that kind of a group of collage artists kind of create, and that's artists working together. And it's transnational. It's beyond national borders. It's beyond geography. It is about an affinity. It's about this interest, but also it's about being in conversation and community with one another. And artists do this, but collage artists do it a lot. And it's kind of remarkable. It's also happening outside of the market. If you think about where the art world comes together, it's Art Basel in Miami, it's Documenta in Germany, it's the Venice Biennale, it's these large art events that kind of punctuate the calendar, and yet those are all driven by the market. And collage artists are not motivated by the market. And we're not doing things because, oh, if I do this, I can sell a few $100,000 worth of art. Now, it would be nice if we all got there, but we're not there yet. But that is also something that I think is somewhat remarkable. So Schwitter Army, that project happened in January and February 2020. And if for those that didn't notice, there was a massive pandemic that took place immediately after. And that pandemic meant that as we were kind of taking shape and forming Kolaj Institute, that we had to adjust and figure out what the hell we're going to do now. Because all of a sudden, our plans, which were to bring people to Scotland and do these residencies, to bring people to New Orleans for Collage Fest, to engage in symposiums around North America and Europe, and try to kind of bring this community together, couldn't physically happen. And it was a blessing and a curse. It was a curse because I had to learn how to sit here and be on camera. And this is the most uncomfortable thing I do in my life, right? But more importantly, it was a blessing because it allowed us to kind of become comfortable with these tools that allow us to be in community with one another while being across and around the world. And that to me is incredibly remarkable. And so we pivoted. We said we're going to take our program for Kolaj Fest and turn it into a series of online programs, as well as we're going to take our artist labs and residencies that we were going to do, and we're going to do them virtually. And we learned and figured out how to do that. And in the meantime, we've been kind of quietly and maybe not so quietly developing this organizational structure. And we've moved from fiscal sponsorship to, in September, we received the notice from the IRS, which basically says that we are a legitimate 501c3 nonprofit organization. And this opens up an enormous amount of possibilities for both the organization and how we're able to serve this community and involve this community. So I'm going to take a sip of my coffee and I'm going to talk about our mission. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. So what is a Kolaj Institute? So this is the mission. The mission of Kolaj Institute is to support artists, curators, and writers, right? It's really, as much as it's kind of heavily involved with us right now, this is really, the goal here is to be an outwardly facing organization, to create platforms for artists, curators, writers, thinkers to kind of do what they do. And that's a lot of how we structure our projects. We want to kind of study, document, and disseminate ideas that deepen our understanding about collage. And people often say, well, what do you mean by collage? And I say, well, we don't define it, right? Our job is to ask the question. Our job is to say, well, what is collage? Is that collage? What does it mean to think of that as a collage? Right? That's kind of the medium and the genre piece. So the medium is the materials, the physical stuff. And we're every year at Kolaj Fest, we're asked questions about glue. And I swear one day I will do a complete issue of the magazine dedicated to glue. But maybe at Kolaj Fest this coming year, because the call to artists is open. If you want to organize a glue tasting session, perhaps we can, do something like that. But those are issues related to the medium, right? The genre piece starts getting a little bit more interesting, because what we find is that while there's our core of collage artists who are making stuff physically cutting and pasting or digitally cutting and pasting, there's a whole bunch of artwork that is essentially operating the same way as collage. And I would argue that that's a genre. And I would argue that's also a dominant genre that takes place in 20th century and 21st century art. And so we want to study that. We want to understand that phenomenon. It's this community, and this community, I've spoken about that earlier today, but understanding who this community is, how it operates, how it comes together, those points of contact, wanting to understand that and ultimately celebrate that. And then lastly is a 21st century art movement. And I've spoken about that a little bit today as well, but I think, like I said, we have an opportunity to kind of reshape how we think about art movements and what's important and what's not important. So to do all these things, we operate a number of initiatives that do three things. Bring the community together, right? We're all about getting artists knowing and talking to one another. That's why we do residencies. That's why we do labs. That's how we structure a lot of our programs. It's about getting folks in the room or communicating with one another. 2, investigate critical issues, right? We can all get together and make collage, and now our challenge is how do we make collage in new ways that challenge ourselves as artists individually, that get us using different materials or even thinking about our art practice in a different way. How do just we as individual artists grow and develop, and what do we need to think about in order to do that? And then lastly, and I think this is the most important one, is raise collage's standing in the art world. And I spent a lot of time in the magazine and at events, and I like to complain about how collage is treated in the art world. I think I refer to it as the bastard child medium, right? But I'm perpetually frustrated that institutions, legitimate thinking, forward-thinking institutions will do something like, let's have a collage show, and then they just round up some random collage artists and throw them on the wall because, and then they call it cut and paste. But they wouldn't do that with painting, right? They wouldn't have a show where, hey, let's have a show of paintings. Let's gather some random painters together, and we're going to call it brushes and strokes, right? I mean, that's just not good curatorial practice. And I think collage deserves good curatorial thinking, good critical thinking, good understanding of what's going on with what an artist is trying to do, what they're trying to say, how they're trying to contribute to culture. So that's kind of the mission of Kolaj Institute. And how this unfolds is in a series of projects. And a project for us is this ball of activities, often taking place in an arc over time, but it can involve exhibitions, residencies, workshops, artist labs, books and publications, articles in the magazines, or events. And we have a number of guests here today who are actively engaged and going to speak about some of the projects. I'm going to talk about 2 or 3 right now. One is an exhibition and catalog called Where the Sun Casts No Shadow. This exhibition debuted actually in 2019 at the Wilson Museum, and it brings together a group of artists all related to Quito, Ecuador, including El Club de Collage de Ecuador. And this exhibition took place at the Wilson Museum at the Southern Vermont Arts Center in 2019, and then was kind of a little bit lost in the shuffle because of the pandemic. Well, it's now going to be on view at the Knoxville Museum of Art starting in January. And this exhibition was one of the first ones we did that attempted to kind of use collage to tell a larger story. At the core of this is this place called the Playhouse in Quito, Ecuador, which is a kind of creative hub / community center / site for digital nomads. And they had this group of women, working women, who were there, and they identified that the neighborhood didn't feel very safe to them. And as a way of kind of making it more safe, they wanted to create this enormous mural. And so they did exactly that. They took the side of the building and made a mural. And Stephen Schaub, who was in Ecuador at the time, he's a Vermont-based artist, documented the creation of this mural in this massive in-camera collage. And we built a broader exhibition around that. And that's a good example, I think, of how we kind of approach these things. Another example is Empty Columns Are a Place to Dream. This was a project we did in Birr, County Offaly, Ireland, where we invited a few dozen international collage artists to imagine this monument here as a different kind of monument than history played out. And that turned into an exhibition that was part of their Heritage Week in Birr, Ireland in 2021, and ultimately was a book that came out earlier this year. This project was recognized with a National Heritage Award in Ireland, something I'm really proud of, because it really demonstrated how we could bring a group of artists together, engage with the community, bring something to that community. And this is the cool thing. Now in Birr, school children every year use this image and imagine for themselves what monument they would like to make in the center of their town. We did a similar project with Artists in the Archives. This exhibition is still up. It's actually, it will most likely be extended. It's in Middlebury, Vermont at the Henry Sheldon Museum, which is one of the oldest kind of community museums in the United States that's focused on this particular community in Vermont. And again, we brought in a few dozen collage artists to root through their archives, to explore their archives, and to create essentially an exhibition of artwork, of collage that speaks to the history as well as kind of community today. And that work is on view. We also created it as a book. So it's documented in book form. And we also published a folio of prints that is available. These prints exist in Sheldon Museum's archive at a permanent basis. It'll exist in Kolaj Institute's archive at a permanent basis. And we have 3 more of the edition that we're looking to kind of put out in the world. Again, this is a way of raising collage's standing and show what collage artists can do and how they can be in dialogue with the community and help us think through these kind of complex issues. So with that, I'm going to take a break and bring up Christopher Kurtz, who's going to tell us about Poetry X Collage and another project where we're looking at this intersection of poetry and collage and what happened there.
Yeah, Poetry X Collage. So this started as a residency, the Poetry and Collage residency, which had, actually, I'm trying to remember. I don't really remember what the impetus for this was. Like what struck us about this topic. Do you remember, Rick?
Yeah, we were seeing a number of submissions to the magazine over the years that really spoke to that intersection. So there were collage projects where a collage artist was working with a poet, and one would write a poem, the other one would make a collage, or vice versa. And we also noticed that there was a lot of collage that was using language, and it was felt like it was operating as poetry. And then I would also add to that Renee Reisman's project at Kolaj Live Milwaukee, where she basically creates word collages using deconstructed legal documents. And I thought that was a really interesting and kind of fun project. And so we just saw a lot of activity at this intersection and thought, what's going on there? And we wanted to investigate it.
Yeah, and the project has grown so big. That's why I couldn't even really remember how it started, because we got such a huge response to the call to artists for that residency that we ended up doing 3 residencies, 3 groups of 12 artists in March, April, and then our last one was just in September. It's the idea was originally that we would have them create page spreads for a book, and that would be like their canvas to do with whatever they wanted, two pages side by side, and they could make that their own space in the book. And we thought, oh, it'll be really easy. They'll have made the page spreads, and then we'll just drop them in a book, no big deal. And we got from the residents so much work that it was impossible to just create a single book out of it. And so then that became a journal, Poetry X Collage. We have volume 1 and volume 2, and volume 3 is on its way right now. And so the first 2 volumes are the first group in March. That's their work. And then volume 3, and then later, probably in February, volume 4 will be the second group. And then we still have the third group in September's work to get to in volume 5 and 6. And then after that, the plan is to open the call to submissions for anyone to submit their page spreads for Poetry X Collage. So it's huge. It's a big project, and it was kind of overwhelming that the way it resonated with collage artists. I think poetry for me had always been sort of floating in the background as this sort of nonsense play for personally in my own work. And I didn't think a lot about it. And then when we did these residencies, I had to think a lot about it. And we learned a lot. And I think we learned that there's this, this similarity between collage and poetry, that they share a lot of things in common, and that they're hard to nail down exactly what defines them. And we started talking about poetry as a medium and a genre, and the artists did a lot of great work with it, and they explored those topics in depth. And there is some writing, I think, in the book about it, I believe. We may have, or we may not have. I think that there's more, Rick, I think there's more to come.
Yeah, I think what was interesting to me about this project was that we really went in with an idea of what is here, and not only what is here, but also how do you then support it? I mean, one of the challenges with the intersection of poetry and collage is it doesn't necessarily lend itself to exhibition. So although the Poetry Foundation, does do exhibitions of poetry and collage, which I found really exciting, but we really felt like a book and a platform that allows this medium to go out into the world, to be documented and go out in the world was what was needed. But then as we were thinking about that book, there was an element of, well, an edited journal doesn't feel right. That what the artists are doing is so experimental or different and operating in such a different way. What we did is we created a journal where the page spread is a free zone of thinking. That on the page spread, the artist can do whatever they want. They can pick their font, they can do all images, they could do all words, they could mix it up, they could create a poem and then illustrate it, whatever it was. But we felt like it needed to be that free zone of thinking, but also it needed to have some frame so that we could give the reader some language about what was taking place here, some ways of thinking about it, so that it wasn't just kind of, well, that's neat but weird and I don't know what to do with it, but rather, okay, they're doing a haiku, but they're doing it with fragments, like this is a different way of approaching it. And now we can kind of start thinking about it in a different way. So Christopher Kurtz has really pushed this journal along, and it's been amazing to see it kind of come together and be a real thing.
And beyond the journal, the community is strong. I think out of all of our residencies so far, the poetry, the group, one of the groups from one of the poetry residencies has done the most to keep the community going. They still meet monthly and discuss new work. And each meeting, a couple artists will share what they've been working on. And that's it just makes me feel really good about what we've done, because that is one of the things that we champion at the beginning of every residency. We tell people, part of the philosophy of these programs is that you are just as valuable as any guest speaker or faculty member or, expert in the field. You're bringing so much to this with your experience and your perspective. And so to see them keep that community alive is really great.
And that's kind of a neat thing. I mean, when we first started doing the virtual residencies and workshops, the way they work is we bring together people onto a Slack, which is a communication platform, and then we use that to exchange ideas, to give feedback, to engage, and we also meet in Zoom, and that gives us some in-person time, or what feels like in-person time. And when we first started, we were like, okay, the Slack exists, and then we turn it off and it goes away. And what a lot of artists kept telling us was, no, keep the Slack going. And so now we have like a dozen or so active Slacks where there's communities from these residencies and workshops and things that people are still exchanging ideas, saying, hey, I heard about this exhibition, or here's a call for artists you might be interested in. And that kind of community building and is frankly effortless almost on our part, because collage artists are just really good about coming together and supporting one another. So, Christopher, thank you for that. I want to move to Lance, who's going to talk about the Street Crew project, which is another community. Now, this has its roots in Collage Fest, right, Lance?
Unmute myself. There we go. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It started at the very first Collage Fest. You want me to go ahead on, or
go for it?
Introduction, yeah. So yeah, in 2018, the very first one, somehow by magnetism or just by chance, at that very first meeting at the hotel, and you just showed a picture of it earlier, where I just kind of ran into Rosie Shinners and Lori O'Brien, and we realized just right away that we both had, or all three of us rather, had kind of a similar idea with our work, was that we were kind of putting it out, not necessarily as street art, but out in public as public art. Rosie, for quite a while, had been doing a project where she was putting bookmarks, collaged bookmarks out in books, in bookstores and libraries, and for people to just find. And I had been doing a similar thing with my Polaroid pictures earlier, and then with collage. And Lori had been doing some amazing video work with some stop motion stuff in New York, and she had something I think she called the Keyhole Cinema or Keyhole Theater, which was so cool. So we all had an idea of, you know, not the typical kind of venue for an artist, which is, okay, well, I make this work and I may share it with some friends, but really we're kind of looking for, you know, a gallery show or a museum or a publication or something like that. We were kind of more of in the guerrilla type sense of the traditional street artists that maybe, you know, started back with graffiti. So I think we had all done a few things there during that first Collage Fest. Here you can see one of my pieces, a pair of my pieces that I put up in Vienna, probably that same year, actually. I think that's 2018. And so, you know, you can see the difference between, you know, doing art and, you know, then you're really not sure what you're going to do with it afterward. And some people do it as mail art, or they may, you know, try, like I said, try to get an exhibition. We're just putting it out there. And very often it kind of disappears over time. And so I really loved, Rick, when you were talking about the concept of like a movement, because so often, you know, with my students and in other conversations with artists, I've been saying for decades now that there are no more art movements. You know, art movements, you know, since Warhol or maybe since Damien Hirst, you know, movements are dead. Nothing's new, nothing shocks, nobody comes together as a style necessarily. But collage as a practice and street art as a practice is really, I think, one of the major movements of, you know, the 21st century. And so while there's very little of style that would necessarily bring people together in street art, the content or the concept really is what brings it together as a movement. So there you can see another one of the stickers that we use. So our first real get together as, you know, the Collage Street Crew that we're calling it, like the KOLAJ, and then KREWE, because we met in New Orleans, of course. And then in 2019, the three of us became presenting artists for the Collage Street Crew that Rip came up with. And there you can see Rosie working on one of our major pieces there. She does these phenomenal collages and then digitizes them and has them printed out in large, because so many of us work, you know, kind of on a smaller, more manageable scale. And when you want people to drive by or walk by and notice it, you know, you're going for size. So that's a really great way of doing that. We also, like the previous picture you saw, the little street stickers, I actually had made a little stamp, a rubber stamp that we love so much. And that was for the Collage Street Crew. And we had some people that were participating and we challenged them during that. I think it was just one of the workshops during Collage Fest 2019 to kind of go out and see if they could experiment with doing some street art themselves. And people just really amazed me in some of the pictures that they started posting. And it was really new to a lot of people in collage that they hadn't really thought of letting go of their work in that way. So then the next year we did a call to artists and we had the online, and this is of course when COVID hit. And so here you can see one of the pieces, let me bring up here. I want to make sure I'm getting these people right. So this is Sarah Michalak, I think it's how it's pronounced, was experimenting with some street art collage in our call to artists. So this was in 2020 when we started doing everything online. And we had many artists from all over the world that had our that joined our online kind of discussion really about street art in the practice of collage. And so it really, that's where it really started to grow into kind of a community more than just, you know, a couple of artists talking about what they do. So here you can see another one. This is, let's see, let me bring that up here. This is, this is called Cabbage Face by Cindy Lee, another great artist that we've really connected a lot with. And so, you know, like I said, it really kind of grew into a community. And just seeing the work that people were doing. Obviously, we learned about people who were already doing this on their own, and they shared their methods with us and everybody. And we all just started exchanging ideas, and like we do in so many of the collage groups, we were talking about methods and glue, of course, and then there was a whole different discussion on wheat pasting, and maybe, you know, the documenting of the street art, because that, I think, more than other means of display, is a huge part of it. It's almost part of the art itself, is documenting it, you know, in situ, right? Like out in the world. And people are very different about the way they place it. Here we have, let's see, this is it's called The Day After, by Romero in Cadiz, Spain. And so you can see, you know, a lot of people are doing different things. Some people may not have, you know, a city that they're going to go out and put, you know, traditional graffiti type areas where they would put collages up, and may go find a more natural place. I know Rosie found some amazing places. Maybe this was a real group that we needed to start, you know, kind of cohesing or getting the glue out and get us all together as a real movement. And I really started to love the idea of the name of the Collage Street Crew, you know, in the tradition of the graffiti crews, you know, CREW, or the rap crews or something like that, to use that terminology. So then I guess after the call to artists, we had the online residency. So we were still kind of in COVID times. What's the next picture there? Let me see. So that one is, let's see, my little slideshow here. So yeah, this is for the residency. So this is Simone Londorf, and we put a call to artists out for the residency and got some amazing submissions from all over the world. I know we had more than 5 or 6 countries represented, and for, I think it was 4 or 6 weeks, we all got together on Slack, you know, several times a week, and then we would meet on Zoom once a week to talk about the progress. We kind of challenged them to come up with a major project that they were going to complete by the end of the residency. And everybody had all kinds of different ideas, and then we discussed them and influenced one another. And just, I was blown away by the work from all the different people, because coming from so many different backgrounds and, you know, especially, you know, countries with different political issues going on. And of course, everyone has their own special interests, especially maybe politically or socially, that they're interested in trying to bring light to. So it really opened my mind and everyone else's, I think, on, you know, the different places that people were coming from. And so you can see here, you know, just one of the pieces that was created. This is a multiple piece, and again, in situ, right? So the documentation of the pieces is kind of part of the piece, because in most of these cases, the pieces just deteriorate, or they're ripped off and thrown away by, you know, city or county people, government. And so documenting it becomes maybe more important than the putting up of it itself. So I think that's part of a big part of the future of what Collage Street Crew will encompass, will be the documenting of not only collage street art only, but all kinds of different street art, and making sure that we try to continue to document that process as it grows and changes. So I think we'll go on to the next one here. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So, Gabriel Gutierrez, and then this one is missed also. Wow, you're going right ahead of me there. Okay, so there's Tim Grakowski. That was an amazing project that he did. That was really just, he did so many different pieces in different parts of the city, and they all kind of came together as this cohesive group that you only got to see in photographs, because they were in different parts of the city, and some of them were more successful than others and more prominent than others. And so the documenting of it became the work, right? Showing it all together as he did it and as it happened. And then the next one there is, yeah, that's the one. So this is Alicia Sadi, and they did some amazing work with kind of a local flair. You know, they had some very specific, I can't remember exactly what the issues were, but I know that it was kind of based around some of the local economic and social and educational issues. And so they were making statements, you know, with their work, which is so often, you know, part of street art, where you're trying to say something with what you're doing. And that's really, can be a really intricate part of it, right? It's very subjective. And so you may be making something that you think is very obvious. Oh, I'm making a statement against, you know, the man or whatever, and I'm going to put it up and everybody's going to understand what I mean, and I'm going to change the world. And people just go, oh, wow, that's a beautiful piece. How cool is that? Or it may be the other way around, where you just meant it to be something pretty and somebody goes, oh my God, what are they trying to say? So that's all part of the documentation, right? And maybe the artists can say what they're thinking, and maybe it's not as important.
I think that's the, well, I think you really touched on the key thing here, because, you know, there's artists doing amazing work. They have this remarkable practice. I mean, in Montreal, New Orleans, in any city one lives in, I think one starts to see it on a regular, reoccurring basis, and one might start putting together what those ideas are. But from an art professional point of view, like as a curator, it can be really difficult to gather that information and to develop that picture. But I think it's one of those places where more people have contact with collage as street art than they do with collage in the gallery, just by its virtue of being out there on the street. And so it behooves us to really know what's going on in this corner of the world.
Yeah, definitely. It's in some ways, in many places, it's kind of a secret part of the world. You know, when I do some tours here in St. Petersburg, Florida, where I am, and I introduce people to the world of like art stickers and you know, some of the kind of more subversive street art that isn't just like, you know, a mural by some famous artist. And it's like they're discovering a whole new language almost. You know, people are always, I take my teen classes out and we do scavenger hunts looking for certain artists. And so they're always running to the next stop sign to look on the back to see if there's an artist that put their work up there so they can get their little check mark on the list. So it's sometimes it can be secret. And it's just so exciting. You know, this book here that Christopher works so amazingly on for so long, it really, I'm sure, is just a labor of love. Every single piece that we received in all of these different iterations of the street crew were so inspiring. I'm sure it was just really hard to pick what was going to go into this publication. Do you want to talk about that at all, or?
I mean, you're right. From the residency alone, we had so much work to sift through, and then also going back into the history of Collage Street Crew and all of the things we did at Collage Fest, and then the open call and the founders, you and Rosie and Laurie. It was a lot to cram into one book, but I was committed to telling that history. I didn't want to leave any of it out. I felt like it was all very important. And I think now that it's finished, it's a nice timeline of events and the creation and growth and maintenance of a community. It's almost like a roadmap. Like if you wanted to start your own community, like here's a way to do it. Here's one way to do it. And there's just a lot of really beautiful art in here as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that really brings us to what's next for Collage Street Crew. So Karen asks and Karen, you asked a really great question in the Q&A. You know, do you have a digital place where people can post in situ outside posted collages? Well, this is really the issue, right? There's no one documenting collage as street art and creating an archive that allows one to study it or even to document it. But here's the thing, this community is international. We've got people in almost every country who can go out and be our spies and recruiters. And so one of the things we're looking at this year is how do we document, how do we gather this information? Right now, Lance has created a Facebook group called Kolaj Street Crew, and that is one place where folks can share that information. There's also operates as a hashtag on Instagram. And my concern about that is that Instagram will one day go away. It'll become like LiveJournal. It'll become like MySpace. It'll become like AOL forums. Okay, yeah, I'm old. Get over it. But I think that there's a role for the Institute to play in terms of gathering and documenting this. And so we've got some plans coming up. One is there's a street. Well, one is a much deeper dive into Wallflowers as a book. And I believe that's on January 22nd. There will be a Kolaj Live Online event about that. Number two, there is now open on the site a call to artists for an in-person street residency in New Orleans that takes place in conjunction with Collage Fest. So this will, folks will meet on the Sunday before Collage Fest. They'll be in residency and community for the week. And then during Collage Fest, they will show their work, and also we'll have a panel and a conversation about street art. And then our plan is that in later in the summer, probably August, I'm thinking, that there will be a working group, a workshop that really looks at how do we document this. And so right now we're researching models, and there are a couple of models. There is a museum of street art that attempts to do this work, but they're not necessarily focused on collage or have that lens, right? And our hope is that from that kind of residency or workshop that is offered later in this year, from that comes a methodology and a system where we can then, back to Karen's question, be a digital repository for this, but also in a way that documents the location, possibly the artist, possibly the themes that are working on there, and that will inform projects as we move forward. And that's kind of how Kolaj Institute is thinking and working. You know, we kind of move into an area, and before we move on to the next area, Lance, do you have any final thoughts?
No, that's exactly what I was hoping you would say about documenting it. You know, I envision some kind of, like you said, repository, whether it's maybe a blog, if those still exist anymore, or even just the Facebook page, which, like you said, eventually will go away, or maybe even a series of publications like the poetry thing. One word I didn't use before that I was hoping to just get out there is like the street art in some areas is kind of like a conversation between artists and the public. And it's this ongoing conversation that evolves over, you know, days or weeks or years even. You might think about that. There's that documentary about the Banksy versus Robbo, you know, thing that went back and forth. You can look up that. But yeah, I just wanted to use that word conversation because it's a real kind of starting point. And the future really is just up to the people who are doing it, right?
Miss Printed weighed in with a comment I'd like to share with the group because I'm not sure everyone can see it. But they say, I find it interesting that some curators that organize street art festivals told me that they see a lot of similarity with the collage community and taking the collage to the streets with the beginning of graffiti and how that spoke to people. And I would also love to shout out to Miss Printed on this because Miss Printed does brilliant locative collage in both their small town in Norway, but also in cities around. It's something that's been fantastic to watch, and it's Miss Printed on Instagram. Go follow that artist. Thank you for that comment. And this is the thing, is that artists are doing these things and there's no real mechanism for them to show up in the broader art world in a way that we can then look at them and think about them. And I find that kind of interesting. I want to pivot now to Gretchen, to GE Vote, and the project she's been working on. You have been engaged in politics and collage because you like to stir shit up.
That's what I do. I'm so good at it. play to your strengths is what I hear. Well, and what's actually really exciting, what you guys have been talking about, and what sort of drove me to do a residency about political collage, is community. Like I think the C word that keeps coming up in this collage is community, and how important this is for us to form a community. And so I've been doing political collage work for, I don't know, 15 years or so, but sort of seriously in the past 5 to 10 years. And what I noticed in doing this is it's kind of a lonely road. Like the collage itself is a very niche form, and then political work itself is a very niche form. Until 2020, when, you know, we all kind of cared about politics in a different kind of way, I think. And there was just a lot of intersectional things that were happening, where it wasn't just the pandemic. It was the pandemic and the socioeconomic gap. It was the pandemic and racism and climate change and sort of all these things sort of began coming to a head in 2020. And I saw so many artists interested in doing political work, particularly collage artists really interested in doing political work, who hadn't been interested in doing it before, and who were kind of at a loss of like where to start or what to do or where to go. And so even though I've been doing political collage work for a very long time, I've never had sort of this intention to teach or to educate or to do a residency or anything. And so Rick and Christopher were like, have you ever thought about this? And I was like, no, I have not. And then I kept seeing so many artists like trying to do more and not knowing where to go. And so I came back to them and said, actually, I have been thinking about doing this, but I have no idea what to do. And it was kind of brilliant with Kolaj Institute, because they're so open into like, okay, we can give you the means and the templates and sort of help you organize yourself into how you want to share this thing you know a lot about. And I can be very much like, I know a lot about this thing, I don't know what to do with it. And so this politics and collage residency was sort of born out of perfect timing. This is one of my works called 2020. It's sort of one of my more chaotic ones.
Oh my God, that feels like 2020.
It's actually like, it was really intense making it, but now looking at it again, like my stomach is just sinking a bit, like, oh, the good old days of 2020. That was a nutshell. Anyway, so what was really exciting about beginning to do this residency is when we put out the call, I had no idea how many people would actually be interested in this, because again, this always feels like a really niche form. And one of my big reasons for wanting to do this was to build a political collage community. And we had a lot of applicants, didn't we, Christopher? Like we had so many that we ended up sort of similar to the poetry one. We did 2 rounds. So we could essentially get as sort of many interested people in this as you know, wanted to be a part of it. So we had 2 rounds of 12 to 13 artists each, similar to Lance's online residency. You know, you meet on Zoom once a week. And then in between, these poor guys, my artists are incredible, because I gave them so much work. I was so worried about not giving them enough to do that I gave them way too much to do. So they were reading articles and discussing really difficult concepts and really difficult political concepts in terms of how it relates to art, sort of the ethics of making political art as well as doing collage exercises, drafts, what I call sketches, to work on their own final piece for the end. And then during the Zooms, we barely had the time to chat because we had all these brilliant guest speakers. So Rick talked about politics as sort of a whole, and art as a whole, and culture, and how we can sort of mix these and drive the narrative. He talked a lot about Barbara Kruger. We had John Hartfield, who's the grandson of John Hartfield, the sort of premier collage artist. He spoke about his grandfather's work and how he helped fight Nazis, and how political work like moved the narrative in World War II, and sort of the importance of doing political work. And then the artists just began to sort of take off and do their own stuff about whatever topic they wanted to make work about. This is Penny Matir. She did work about women's rights. This was actually before Roe versus Wade fell in the US. It was when we all sort of began seeing the signs that was coming. She did a piece on that. And what was really sort of incredible was how these artists pushed themselves to not just make work about really difficult topics, but they really push their work in really different ways. So this is really different from what Penny was like, sort of her style and what she'd been working on before. I forced them all to slow down because I think a lot of collage artists, we make art fairly quickly, right? Like, even though it can take some time, it's really easy to like get in the zone and pop out a piece or two a day and make this really cool work. And with political work, there's so much more involved. There's so much more that you have to think about, that you have to consider, that you have to really sort of dig in deep to look at when you're making it. That one of the hardest things I think for a lot of the artists was I sort of forced them to take a step back and look at, why are you using what you're using? How are you using what you're using? Is it saying what you think it's saying? Sort of like Lance was saying with his street art, you may think you're making a piece that says X, but someone else might read Y or Z. Is that okay? Do they have to read X? Is it okay that they read Y or Z? And so that was one of the discussions that we had a lot as well with political art, is how to get your message and your intention across. And so for me, it was really kind of thrilling to see what the artists created and to see them build this community, because I don't think I can understate how difficult some of the stuff we talked about was. And so this could very this could very easily have gone off the rails. And I think it's a really good indication of sort of the care and love and compassion that Christopher and Rick have in building Kolaj Institute, as well as that all the artists came to this with, that we were able to have these really interesting, difficult conversations, and the artists were able to make some really brilliant work out of them, all with that sort of level of care and compassion that I think you need when making any sort of art, but particularly with political art, where your goal is kind of to stir shit up. So yeah, this is Xavier Carter. He did a series of 4. Some of the artists did one piece, some of them did a series. We did 2 rounds of this, and now we're currently in a 3rd separate round, and we put a little more parameters on this new round in terms of what they can actually do, sizing and all of that. But the first couple rounds, they were doing assemblages, they were doing, 3 foot by 3 foot pieces. Like, it was really extraordinary what they created. This is Gaia Theory, who did a piece about Sri Lanka. It's a diptych. So this is one of the parts. So yeah,
the current round, you mentioned the current round, like they're working on an exhibition, right?
They are, yeah. So the artists just finished their Zoom meetings. And with this particular residency, I was really keen on making sure the artists had enough time to work on something, because especially after asking them to slow down, it seemed a bit presumptuous to ask them then to make something really quickly. So we had a month of like meeting and working together, and then now they have a month to just sort of go off and do their own thing and create their final pieces. So we're still in discussion in the Slack. We're still having sort of casual Zoom meetups for anyone who wants to go into their work and talk about it. But they're in the month of sort of going off and now putting everything they learned into practice. So I asked not to show anything from the artists from this round yet, because they're all in the draft stages, and I didn't want to put anybody on the spot for something that might be different from what their end piece is. Which is kind of the other exciting thing, is sometimes they'll come in with like, this is my draft of what my final piece is going to be. And then a month later, they're like, okay, it was completely wrong. I did something completely different, and this is what it is instead, which I love. It's really exciting to see where these guys go.
And I think that's the model we're really looking at Kolaj Institute. It's not, the residencies and labs are not simply theoretical exercises, that it's an opportunity to come together to make work that then goes out into the world. And so the first 2 rounds was an exhibition, resulted in an exhibition at the Domino in New Orleans during Collage Fest, and then also became a book, became a publication, I believe. Christopher's got that, yeah.
And an online exhibition. There's an online exhibition that's still up now as well.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of emblematic of how we think about these things, that it's not just bring the group together and then we all go off on our own ways. What we want to do at Kolaj Institute is then help put these things out in the world. And books are a way to do that. Exhibitions are a way to do that. These online programs are definitely a way to do that. But thank you, Gretchen. It's been wonderful hearing from you about what's going on over there in politics and collage. The next thing for folks, will there be another residency on this at some point?
Yeah, yes, probably. I mean, politics is hard, right? And what we talk a lot about in making political work is that there are sort of peaks and valleys. There are times when people really care about politics and political art, and there are times when we are tired, and people almost need a break from it. So we just came from a massive peak, and it seems like we're going into a valley where people are getting pretty tired. So it's one of those where we sort of see where the interest is at. There's been a suggestion to focus the next round on a theme in particular, rather than having a really broad sort of politics in general, focus it on a particular theme, which I think might be an exciting way to keep this going in new and different ways and engage people in different ways, rather than, doing intro to political collage over and over again. This would be sort of political collage 201, which I think could be exciting. But it depends. It honestly, like with political work, it's such a unique field, and it's so dependent on how passionate people are to make it. And what's been exciting is finding that people are actually really passionate to make it, but it's a difficult field, and it can take a lot out of people. So
exactly, and that's the thing, like artists, we can make and make and make, and I'm as equally interested in how we put things out in the world as it is of how we make things. And which brings us actually to the next project, which is collage and illustration. This kind of intersection actually started for us. If you'll notice, we think a lot about intersections. And one of the things in the magazine we saw was that a lot of artists were working as illustrators. They were illustrating text, they were creating images for blogs, online news programs, all sorts of things. And I was really curious, like what that was about. And on top of that, I'm a big fan of old forgotten books and literature. And when I was curating the Money Show at the St. Kate's Arts Hotel in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I came across this book called Oh Money Money. And this book was written by the woman who created Pollyanna, for those of that generation that remember those stories from Disney. And the thing is, I had no idea this book existed. And it was this incredible kind of story about how different people relate to money differently. And so it was very relevant to the exhibition, but there was no way to bring a book into the exhibition unless we worked with a group of artists to create the artwork to do that. And so we created the collage and illustration residency and brought together artists to create images to drag this very early 20th century book into the 21st century, because it is very much about a proper family in New England, and its themes do not register with the kind of very real, diverse world that we live in. And so it really needed that kind of pull to make it relevant to today. Now, this is the first book project we did on collage and illustration. Nancy's been spearheading our second project, which is a less obscure text. That's Kate Chopin's. Do you think Chopin or Chopin?
I always say Chopin, but like, I don't know.
Yeah. We should figure that out at some point.
I know.
But tell us about The Awakening, because it's a fantastic, very important book.
Yeah, so I'll just share my screen really quick too. Oh, sorry. Isn't this terrible? I'm like, what am I doing?
Everyone hum the Jeopardy theme to themselves.
Seriously, please. Sorry. Oh my gosh. Can you see this?
It looks fantastic, Nancy.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, this book for me was always one that I was really interested in. I guess I should say about my background a little bit, but my background is I'm a trained graphic designer, and the book or the projects I started really getting involved in were book cover designs. And it was a lot of them were for poetry and literary magazines and things like that. And I was an English major, undergrad major, so I was always really interested in, and then I started taking a graphic design class, and I started thinking about, oh my gosh, like poetry, right? Thinking about illustrating poetry, what you could do with like type. And anything that I would read, I was always thinking of these interesting visuals. So I started doing collage later, much later. And after I was invited to, Rick, you're gonna have to help me with like the names of the things, but I was part of, during COVID, part of one of the first online residencies, which would have brought us, which did bring us to Tulane's archives. And we started kind of digging through these archives and finding topics to dig through. It was awesome.
It was the Pandemic Artist Lab at Tulane. Yep.
Yeah, because it was like the height of the pandemic. So it was so great. So a lot of my personal work has always revolved around women as a central theme, women and their roles, how women are viewed, body image stuff, how text that is said, or how words relate to humans, and kind of like making these, I don't know, like thinking about advertisements and the language that's used in advertisements. And so my stuff has kind of always encompassed a lot of that. But so in this residency, a big part of it was to also create a project proposal, which I still haven't finished, which is now like 2 years. It was, oh my gosh, I loved it, but it was so painful. I just have such a hard time figuring out what I do, or writing what I do, right? So in this residency, I had this idea of the awakening, and I thought, oh my gosh, I would love to do the awakening, and especially since it takes place in New Orleans and Grand Isle and Louisiana. My big plan was like to do some sort of exhibition. That proposal has not happened yet, but it's still, I have no doubt I'm going to do it at one point. But I did talk to someone, Wiley Garcia, who is an artist in Vermont, and we were talking about this book, The Awakening, and how great it was. So and we both really, it resonated with both of us. Then when the Oh Money Money residency was going on, I was asked to do just a talk about collage and illustration, and how I use illustration, or how I use collage to illustrate things. It's just my thing. And then I was starting to think after that, I was like, wait a minute, I want to do The Awakening. So of course, Rick was very gracious and was open to it. I kind of like, I think just kind of went like walked up to him and was like, I've got an idea. So yeah, it just got rolling, and it rolled fast. And so we decided to do The Awakening. And I was really interested in how collage artists would focus on, look at The Awakening, which is a text from the turn of the 20th century, very Victorian, how 21st century collage artists might take those themes and flip them in a 21st century view. A lot of the themes were about marriage, kind of discontent, finding yourself, definitely class was a big issue. So that really made me very curious. And so that was kind of part of the call, was to, ask people like, this is, what I want to do. These are the questions I want to address. So it ended up being 35 applicants, and we chose 14. We now have 140 or 104 collages that have been created. I just counted them in the Google Drive, which is fantastic. So this is kind of like how the breakdown was for the whole residency. And it was 4 different kind of like modules. The deadline would be November 2nd. That didn't happen. Like, as we were working, I realized, oh my gosh, we need more time. I mean, there was just so much. There was so much to really, I feel like this could have gone on for like 3 months or more, right? So that deadline, I tweaked it. I actually added in 2 extra sessions for those who wanted to join in if they could. Some couldn't because they were, it's hard. But we did join, kind of meet. I think I break it down a little bit more. Yeah. So this is kind of like the real breakdown of like what happened in each session. So session 2 was when we started doing the book discussion. Session 1 was like the just orientation, talking and getting to know the other residents. Session 2 was the breakdown of the book and finding the themes and kind of just doing this big like brainstorming session and talking about what others had picked up from the book. The session 3 was, we had a collage discussion with Heather Ryan Kelly, who's fantastic, and has done projects. She uses James Joyce's work. So Finnegan's Wake, she did I think it was a collage a day, right? And then Ulysses.
She's still working on Finnegan's Wake. She's like, she's like 2/3 of the way through now. She's been doing a collage for each page, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she was, it was just really great. One of the things she had talked about, how the text becomes your collaborator in projects like these, right? So it's like, oh my gosh, that was so fantastic. And so that was really helpful to kind of see her process, I think, for the other residents. And I also, the first session, talked about my process. And then the final review was session 4, but it wasn't really session 4. Like I said, it kind of evolved out. And we didn't do a final review on that session. We ended up doing it like 2 weeks later. So we did a lot of giving, feedback, looking at people's work, and just going back and forth. And just, there were a couple times where it was, the question was, is it done or not done? And so just to kind of get things moving, but everyone was fantastic. There was, a lot of, just back and forth. I just wanted to show what the mind map and the mental map looked like, what we put together, and the themes that were kind of popping out of it. And again, I feel like this still just scratched the surface, right? We could have probably done like a week of this and pop things out. This is the Google Drive that we had, and it basically was only 3 folders at first. All the residents just started compiling folders and putting in images of things that they had. It was so cool. It's like this huge digital library repository for everybody to work off of. We had working files so people could work off of each other's files if they felt stuck. It was great, and everyone was very open. I did notice that a lot of the residents went in like one direction, or were very kind of solo with their work, and definitely didn't want anyone to touch it. But some of them, but then they were very open with like, you can definitely like play with this one, right? So we have a bit of mix of everything, I think, in all the collages left. This is just an example of like what was happening ongoing during. So these are some collages that some of the residents were working on and working through, and these weren't any of the finals, but it's really fun to kind of look back through Slack and see what everyone had done. My God, I need to just like download all of that and create a file of the process. So these are some of the finals. I just wanted to give you a little snippet of what ended up coming out of this. What I found really interesting, and I kind of got a goosebumpy, was when I started I just downloaded, I think like 8 of these. But when I started playing them out, I realized how similar they are. Like it's weird to me that there were 14, or was it 14 or 15, Christopher? Yeah. So I was curious, like how all these different people were coming together, yet it's almost like everything looks really great together, right? It's not like anything looks, it's so like there are so many similar kind of elements that were being used. And I know they were pulling from some files, but just, I feel like stylistically, it was really interesting to me to see this.
That key one is mine.
I know.
But none of those materials came from me. That was me just going through the Google Drive and being like, oh, someone uploaded this, someone uploaded that. And I just started downloading things and playing around with them in Photoshop.
That's awesome.
And it's just so much fun. I talk about it a lot. I think collage is already a collaboration with the past because of the way we use materials. And so that, I think collaboration comes naturally to collage artists. Peter asks in the Q&A, process-wise, did everyone during the workshop then craft collages using a digital program like Photoshop?
Well, that's interesting. I'm going to show you a couple that some people were completely analog because they didn't have the technical knowledge yet, and they were trying, and I think they were just frustrated. And I said, do your thing. Like, then they took a photograph of it, and I'll show you which ones those are. But I didn't want people to feel like they had to do just digital. And I think for the most part, there was a mixture, right? A mixture of things. One quick thing I wanted to say too was, with this one, the one on the right, I added to it because someone didn't know how to do something technically. So I was like, I totally know how to do that. And so I added in like the bits on the edge and just Photoshop that in. And like Christopher was saying, I think that's how everybody felt like the collaboration was happening. If they were working on their own pieces, they still felt like the collaboration was happening because they were pulling from other people, right? So it wasn't necessarily maybe like handing it back and forth, but there were, elements being used back and forth. So that's, and so you can see some of them pop up, again. So this example on the right, that was an analog piece. And it's fantastic. And I love it even more because the detail of the shadows, you could get it digitally. I mean, you could pull it off probably, but I just think that when you do it analog, there's something that happens that you don't get in the digital world.
I would say that's one of the observations I found really interesting about watching the collage and illustration residencies is how quickly they become about collaboration. And I think working as an illustrator, you have to collaborate with your editor, your art director. It's a collaborative in nature, that work. But also it's been interesting to watch how artists have worked in a hybrid process, which I think if you're going to work as an illustrator out in the marketplace, then it is a hybrid process always, because your files, you're not going to send paper to an editor, you're going to send digital files. And so it's interesting to watch how that plays out within the group, and also just how supportive people are. Like you mentioned, like, oh, so I went and digitally put these other things in here. And we saw that in the Money residency as well, where artists were like, I don't know how to do that, but I think this should be like this. And someone else would jump in and do the digital work for them, or, hey, could you cut this out and scan it for me? I want it to look analog. And that's been wonderful watching that collaboration.
Exactly. Yeah. I didn't want people to feel bad because they didn't know how to use Photoshop. I was just like, do your thing and I'll tell you what I'm like, you can just take I think, I was like, you don't even have to have a really fancy camera. iPhones take such great photos now and that's what they ended up doing. And I just think it's beautiful, and then here's another example. The one on the right is another example of an analog collage that they just took a photograph of and then sent it to me, and they didn't have, so they just sent it to me as a raw camera image, and I'm just, translated it into the right file. So that's no big deal on my end, right? So so it's been really cool. So this is just like a little brief overview of what a residency might be like, the kinds of things that you would see afterwards.
Nancy, when's the book coming out?
I know. Oh yeah, that's the other part.
That's Rick giving someone a hard time about a book time.
Gosh, I know. So my big plan was I was going to get it done before Christmas, laid out. Didn't happen. So the plan is to lay it out over Christmas. So I'm hoping to get like the files into like you in January.
Well, thank you, Nancy. And then there is, it sounds like Christopher Kurtz has got an idea for another book. Christopher Kurtz, you want to tackle Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Yes, the modern day Prometheus. And I've already touched base with Nancy about it, and she's on board. We're going to tackle this one together. We're pushing Rick out of the way, and we're saying, get your obscure texts out of here. We're going to do something popular.
There's a really good book about early 20th century, written in the early 20th century, about the economics of industrialization and its philosophical impacts on society. And I really would prefer to do that one, but I'll defer to your monster story.
It's just I just think Frankenstein's monster and collage are like a perfect metaphor that go hand in hand with each other. And there's a lot of great themes. It's also one of the first science fiction novels written by a woman. It's just, I think it's a great book all around.
Agreed. I actually agree. Yeah.
I agree.
Well, thank you, Nancy. We're we're running a little long, and so I'm going to just talk about a couple more things. And Rachel, we're going to get to your question in a minute. One of our newer initiatives that we've actually kind of started and then realized it was a project. So we organized a group of residents to go, artists to go to visit Scotland, this little place called Sanquhar, Scotland. And here they are, Mers Gallery. And the goal was to be in community with one another, to explore the folklore of the region as a way of exploring the place, exploring that Sanquhar as a location, and then make collage for that. And so the work the artist did in this residency in Scotland will now travel to the Knoxville Museum of Art, where it will be an exhibition from March through May of this year, and also will be published as a book. So we've selected some of the stories of folklore and are publishing this as a book. And this speaks to kind of the evolution of how we think. We're like, I don't think we're done with folklore yet. And so what we've done is we've organized a series of activities that are kind of doubling down on folklore. The thing is, I think folklore is an underappreciated, somewhat kind of bastard category of stuff. I mean, if we think about folklore, it is about how a community expresses itself to one another over time. Like, I started thinking it about folklore as the imagination of the past, but the more I thought about it, it's about how people in a community share information and knowledge and values with one another, and how that information and identity is shared over time through generations, and how so much of folklore teaches us how to be in the world in ways that I think are incredibly important in times of crisis and collective trauma, and when we are required to be resilient as a way of preserving our communities. I think our communities and communities around the world are going through facing massive disruption, particularly as climate change continues to unfold. And in order for a community to survive, it needs to hold its identity. It has to understand itself. Folklore does that. And artists can play this amazing role of activating and celebrating these stories of a community. And that's kind of what I want to explore a little bit in this folklore project. So what we're going to do in conjunction with the museum, exhibition at the Knoxville Museum, is we're going to organize a residency where folks come to Knoxville, spend a week making collage at the museum and exploring these ideas about folklore. And so that residency is coming up. And also we're back to Scotland in April, where we're investigating place. It's an opportunity to kind of connect with other collage artists, but also to kind of explore place, and more importantly, how to investigate place. Because I think place is really critical to art right now. I think rooting one's artwork in a sense of community is a way to kind of both support and build that artwork, but also ultimately to it's a source of deep inspiration, but it's also a way to kind of have artwork speak to a society and serve the broader world. In addition to exploring Scotland, we're exploring New Orleans and looking at New Orleans as an archive, and the city as an archive. We had a fantastic artist lab with a group of residents back in November. We'll probably bring another group in March that are kind of using New Orleans as a little bit of a laboratory to figure out how one identifies stories that they can tell with their artwork and then put their work out into the world. Rachel had asked about curating collage. This is a workshop that we're going to be offering in January of this year. The deadline is at the end of December. We may offer it again next year. We do kind of July. I think we're going to be doing a workshop on curating collage in the winter and collage as practice in the summer. But curating, this workshop is really about developing a critical lens for one's own artwork, and also being in community where we're developing a critical lens of other people's work. And the idea is that that critical lens allows collage to go out into the world. I'm a big believer that art only wields power with its context, that it's the stories we are kind of asking people to engage with art that allow it to kind of go further. Other things we have coming up, and I'm kind of running through these because we're running a little late. World Collage Day, second Saturday of May. This is a day where we ask people to go out and connect with their own communities. Call up your local museum and say, hey, I'd like to plan an event. Now's the time to kind of do that. We mentioned Collage Fest. That's happening again this year in New Orleans, June 7th to the 11th. And a lot of the projects that we spoke about here will realize at Collage Fest in some ways. Siobhan that asked about when the Knoxville residency is. That's going to take place March 19th through the 23rd, I believe. And the opening of the Mythical Landscapes exhibition in Knoxville is also the 19th of March. So that's when that's taking place. I would just going to leave everyone with one big thought, and that is all of this is possible because of the support folks give Kolaj Institute. And that support can come from joining in programs, participating in programs. It also comes in the form of money in terms of donations and those resources that we need to kind of create the infrastructure to allow these projects to take place. And so if you like what you heard today, please consider making a donation to Kolaj Institute.